Mr. Chairman, I will.
Good morning. Everybody grab a
I'm a
seat.
substitute
We're going to
today.
start up here.
No, I'm Carol. Carol, so it won't be hard to forget. Yeah, I sub for all the secretaries and I kind of. Yeah, Carol's a good one.
Mr. Chairman, you are live.
Committee, we're live. Carol, will you please call the roll?
Good morning, Chairman Eklund. I'm here for Carol Clark, your secretary, and my name is Carol Nicolarson. Representative Blackburn. Vice Chair Clausen.
Here.
Representative Fortner.
Here.
Representative Heiner.
Here.
Representative Larson.
Here.
Representative Western.
Here.
Representative Worf.
Here.
Representative Winter.
Here.
Chairman Eklund.
Here. The first bill for our consideration will be Senate File 114, State Land Leases, and the prime sponsor is here to explain the bill. Chairman Boner.
Yeah, well, thank you, Chairman Eklund, members of the committee. It's good to be with you again this morning. So what we have here is a bill dealing with the process state lands goes through for leasing state lands and mostly these school sections. You think of there are two sections usually in each township spread out throughout our state. And so, the objective here is to inure the greatest benefit for the trust beneficiaries, which are primarily our schools. So first thing I did was, try to figure out what in the world inure means. And that means basically guarantee or secure, the greatest benefit for the state, basically. And so there's been two ways that, two primary considerations as to, okay, how do we do that? First is the obvious one. You want to raise as much money as possible, right? That's the idea if the objective is to get the greatest benefit for the state. But there's also an idea that's throughout our statutes currently is you want somebody who's going to take care of the land, who's going to actively manage it, spray for weeds, make sure that there's not fire hazards from not grazing it, for example. And so there's also an element in our statutes that gives preference or consideration to individuals who are closer to the land in question, the assumption being, of course, that the closer you are, the more likely you are to take care of it. And so what this bill does is it tweaks the current statutes, which are quite old and out of date and ambiguous and really just not up to snuff for the world that we live in now. And so there have been several issues recently with the way, especially with vacant lands, that they've been leased. And so that's an important concept. I think there's different procedures for leasing vacant lands versus lands that have a lease on them. So currently, if, in the vast majority of the time, these state school sections are already leased. And so in that circumstance, the current lessee has an opportunity to match any bid that may be higher. And so there's a preference that sort of works that way. So they have the option of meeting that higher bid. And if they do, they get the lease. Obviously, and so once again, that's, kind of a combination of those two priorities. You want, get as much money as possible, but you also want somebody who's going to take care of that land over the long term. So that's with current leases. There's less issues with that. The challenges that we've had recently have been with vacant land where there isn't a current lessee. And so the issues that we've had, and it's really put our state lands office and our board of land commissioners, our 5 statewide elected officials, who have to ultimately sort of decide who wins and who loses in these cases where the lease is in question. It puts them in a terrible spot. You can imagine the sort of hard feelings that are, in play when there's two entities or two businesses or individuals going after the same piece of land, and they have to decide who wins and loses because our statutes are so ambiguous and provide no direction whatsoever. So what this bill does is it provides some very clear direction, very clear process that everybody can understand, and sets up some rules that, in my time in the legislature, that's kind of the most important thing we can do, make sure everybody's on an even playing field. They know what the rules are. That way, they don't feel like they've been cheated, I guess, even if the outcome isn't exactly what they expected. So that's what the bill does, Mr. Chairman. And I'll go through, I guess, the specifics here. It starts off in paragraph B, which in 36-5-105, that's B is one that deals with vacant lands, which we're primarily concerned with this bill. And a lot of it's kind of wordsmithing, on that first paragraph there on page 2, lines 1 through 13. One of the more substantive changes is changing the and to an or on line 5. So they have to be residents of the state or, a business in the state of Wyoming. We can't have just an out-of-state organization coming in and getting these vacant leases. So you have to be a business in the state of Wyoming. And like I said, this, and you have to, and so you have a laundry list in paragraph B of sort of the checks you have to make to qualify. And maybe the most important one is you have to make an offer at least fair market value. And so the question is, what happens when you have more than one applicant that checks all those boxes? It is pretty easy to check those boxes there. And so the problem comes in when you have more than one qualified applicant. That's what we're doing with this bill here, starting on line 15. So we're talking about preference given to applicants who are occupants or have adjoining land. Once again, we're kind of incorporating that concept, but specifically, we lay out a couple scenarios in paragraphs A, B, and C, going on the bottom page 1 and going on to page 2, going on to page 3. And so once again, if some applicant is eligible for the preference, another one is not, we go with that same procedure. They have an opportunity to meet the highest bid. So that preference for the adjoining landowner is there. But the stickier situation we find ourselves in is, what if both or 2 or more applicants are qualified and are adjoining landowners? So you have 2 neighbors fighting over the same piece of vacant land. You can imagine the tough situation that is. Unfortunately, that happened in my neck of the woods. There's also an incident in Charnock County where the need for improvement was clear, we'll say that. And so what we have here, and actually it's kind of a new concept that I'm excited about, is the idea of doing a live auction. If you have 2 adjoining landowners going after the same piece of vacant land, and they both submit bids that are at least fair market value, then you just kind of resolve it right then and there. You have live auction, and that's important, because the experience we had in Commerce County was that, if you just do a sealed bid process, all that happens is, if the other offers $5 higher, all of a sudden the person that loses out gets real nitpicky with the winning applicant's application, and there's not litigation, that they go through the appeals process, attorneys get involved, and it might go all the way to the Board of Land Commissioners, and they have to make that determination. And so what happens is that everybody spends a lot of money on lawyers. Only one person gets the lease. Whereas if you have a live auction, there's an element of one party voluntarily stepping aside. There's a sense of resolution there. And, they don't have to pay any money if they don't get the lease, if that makes sense. So if they are out the lease, they don't get the lease, at least they don't have to pay for anything. Whereas right now, their attorney fees still persist regardless of whether they get the lease or not. So I think that's it's an exceedingly rare circumstance where you're going to have 2 neighbors fighting over the same piece of vacant land. Mr. Chairman, I should have said at the beginning, there's going to be about 20 vacant parcels up for bid this year, but that's actually higher than normal. Most years it's about 5 per year. So it's rare enough that you have any vacant land up to begin with, and it's exceedingly rare that you have 2 neighbors fighting over the same piece of land. But when it does happen, it's a pretty ugly situation, and this is providing clarity and rules for resolving those situations, if that makes sense. And so that's basically the same idea. Paragraph C basically says, okay, what if there's at least 3 people involved, and 2 of them are adjoining landowners and 1 isn't? Then you just kind of go through the same process. Those 2 adjoining landowners have an opportunity to match that highest bid. If the highest bid is from somebody who is not an adjoining landowner, then they go back and do the highest, or the live auction concept. So That's all, those three paragraphs are, is making very clear how to handle these situations. And also, like I said, really important, it is kind of establishing what exactly that preference means. Another very important concept on the bottom of page 3 is providing notice to adjoining landowners if there's a vacant lot that's up for lease. And that's another issue we found actually in Natrona County, is all of a sudden the adjoining landowner didn't really know that vacant piece of land was for lease. And then all of a sudden an entity that was from a different county had the lease. They didn't even know about it until it already happened. So I'm less familiar with that situation, obviously being a little bit outside of my neck of the woods, but you can imagine the hard feelings that involves with all of a sudden, this school section maybe in the middle of your operation is all of a sudden gone to somebody else. So that's another important one to provide notice. And then of course that preference for the adjoining landowner will kick in as well. And so on page 4, we just go in, we make some additional definitions. Currently, none of these terms like preference are actually defined. Vacant land is not defined. The attorneys told me this was important to once again provide clarity. And so preference, I mean, it's a pretty generic definition. It's basically giving preference to the applicants who are adjoining the vacant land. We decide what vacant land is. It's land that does not have a lease. And also, so that's basically the areas dealing with vacant land. Paragraph A shares dealing with the land. And so paragraph C is the land that's currently under lease. So that's different from paragraph B, which is vacant land. All it does is we differentiate. Preference is used for when there's a vacant piece of land. Preferred right is the term we're going to use for land that is not vacant that currently has a lease. So we're just making a clear distinction there. Right now, the terms are muddled and used interchangeably. This provides is just kind of clean up. And so that's on 36-5-108. That's where we go in and talking about how to deal with current leases. We're striking preference and inserting preferred right. Once again, making that clear distinction and not muddling those two terms. So, and all that, I guess section 108 is a very long-winded way of saying if everything else is the same, then the lease is going to go to the applicant who is closest to the land. So that's all of that. It's a long-winded way of saying that. And so July 1st effective date, Mr. Chairman. Like I said, we have a member of the Board of Planning Commissioners here. She can provide her own testimony, but the testimony we heard in the Senate Ag Committee was that these situations where there's been appeals and there's a serious fight over vacant land in particular have become more prevalent over recent years. I guess, anybody who works in production agriculture knows that it's sort of against the unwritten rules to go out and try to get a lease from somebody else that's in the middle of their operation. And as those unwritten rules increasingly are violated, it's important that we provide clarity in our statutes. And so this is a bill that's absolutely needed to update some very old, out-of-date language in our statutes. It's something that will benefit the state of Wyoming and provide clarity to the process while still ensuring that our producers are taken care of, that the individual closest to the land does in fact have a preference, and that means something, and all the while still ensuring the greatest benefit to the trust beneficiaries. So that's what the bill does. I'll stand for any questions.
Questions, committee? Representative Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So that I understand this live auction, Senator, am I right when I say if there's two parties and they're adjacent to the land, then there would be a live auction? If there's 4 people that make the like bids, then there would be 4 people in that live auction. Is that correct?
If they're all adjoining landowners, they all have to be adjoining landowners.
They all have to be adjoining.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And if not, then the adjoining landowners have an opportunity to meet the highest bid. If the highest bid is a not an adjoining landowner. So,
Representative Wharf? Western, I'm not just sure, but okay. Start with Western, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Boner, or Chairman Boner, on page 3, I'm not seeing on, on lines 2 through 7, I'm not seeing any language that obligates the director to accept the highest bid. It just says the director shall request a final bid from the applicants eligible for the preference at a live auction in the manner as directed by the director to determine the successful applicant. So it says they're going to ask for the highest bid, but doesn't necessarily say that they have to accept the highest bid. Am I understanding that correctly?
Representative Western, you're correct. It doesn't say that explicitly, but they have a constitutional obligation to, take the highest bid in that circumstance. Because like I said, if you look at the two basic elements of considering what's going to inure the greatest benefit, one of those is proximity to the land, and that's already, determined by the process. But then I just couldn't imagine a situation where they'd actually go with the lower bid. And it'd have to be an extraordinary situation where, maybe one of the applicants isn't in good standing, or it has a bad record or something like that. But no, I think that we're covered by the Constitution in that circumstance.
Representative Fortner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't see anything in this bill that would, that clarifies for the old leasee, if he loses the lease to a new leasee, that the new leasee has to pay him for his improvements. Where do you have that?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So it's not in the bill because we're not really changing too many elements it's in paragraph C of, 36-5-105. And so we aren't changing too many elements there. It's mostly focusing on vacant land. And so it's just kind of that consideration is just outside the scope of the bill. We didn't really focus on that.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Well, I know a guy that's got almost a whole section turned into hay ground, and that's his hay base for his whole place. And he's bordered or surrounded by three sides by a different landowner. He lost his lease to the coal company to this other landowner. So where does that put him in compliance with this new bill?
Senator.
Well, Mr. Chairman, it's, he had an opportunity, I think, to match the higher bid if he currently had the lease. We're not looking to, that's just that one individual circumstance. This is something that, I considered, and I'm not trying to portray this bill as being the end all be all to every last thing that deals with, leasing state lands. It's, like I said, I think that situation's outside the scope of the bill. If you want to, it's a pretty broad tile. If you want to add something there that would, help that situation, I would be open to working with you. But yeah, it's just, we're mostly looking to clarify the procedure for vacant leases. I'd love to learn more, but like I said, if it was a current lease, that individual would have had an opportunity to meet the higher bid. And once again, that's an instance of kind of violating what had been, some pretty serious unwritten rules. And so as it's another example of the need for this bill, that's pretty, that's, as a rancher, I'd say that's pretty bad. But we're trying to balance that with the constitutional obligation to raise as much money as possible. But that individual would have had an opportunity to meet the bid if you want to keep that property too.
Okay. So Senator, okay, we have to move really fast. We're going to be like we're in interim mode. So go ahead, Representative Wharf.
Mr.
And
Chairman,
stick with the bill, please.
I will. I've got two questions that are specific to the bill. The first question is, I understand you got a section of ground. How do you, if somebody is corner to corner, is that adjacent as opposed to east of north, south, whatever, you know what I'm saying? I know the corner crossing is an issue, and I guess the question I have is that considered adjacent? And how is this addressing access? I'm assuming if you're corner to corner, you may not have legal access to that. So that's the first question. I got one more question.
Yeah, that's a good question. We'd have to defer to state lands for that specific. I imagine not, there's not real, I mean, from an ag perspective, there's not a whole lot of access you have if it's a, a corner, if you're just touching corners there, but I'd have to defer to state lands for that, how they deal with that.
We'll have a representative from state
Okay.
lands who will be virtual.
And then the next question, Mr. Chairman, is one that I think I'm assuming, I'm hoping it was discussed, but I see the potential that this could become an opportunity for outside sources to come in. Maybe you have two ranches that it's been in the same community. They've grown up together. One of them sells to somebody that has a lot of money that comes in. Now all of a sudden they can outbid the neighbor, and you start seeing a shift from kind of mom and pop ranches to larger conglomerates. I worry if this can't cause a change of ownership on the landscape in our state. I don't know if that was brought up or if that was addressed, because obviously we want to get as much money as we can, but I don't know that we want to change the culture of our state. And that's a concern I have with this bill.
Senator?
Mr. Chairman, that's the same concern that caused me to bring this bill. That's actually the exact situation we had in Commerce County. And so when that happened, just talking from experience, or my constituents' experience, I guess, what happened, it's easy for that big conglomerate to come in and have the higher bid, unexpectedly higher bid. And then that's the end of it. At least this gives that, long-term mom and pop operation opportunity to, mash the bid and then go to a live auction. Like I said, at least, if they lose the live auction, at least they aren't out any money. Whereas the current, we had that exact same situation that you described play out in Commerce County, and the only people that won were the attorneys. So yeah, I share your concern. That's why I brought the bill.
Well, and follow up, Mr. Chairman, because I still see that being problematic, because if the guy's got more money than me, I can be there all day long. I'm not going to be able to outbid him. And at some point in time, it becomes a cost negative to keep trying to get that property. So I just wonder if this is going to shift ownership in a direction we may not want. Thank you.
It'll only affect vacant lands. And so it's kind of a rare situation. I think that this adjustment to the statute will probably be more apt to prevent that from happening than happening. It could always happen there on any land that there is if it came up for
And-
bid.
I'm assuming that vacant land's usually smaller parcels, but if it's a piece of vacant land that's pretty critical to my operation and I lose that in a bidding war and it causes me to lose my ranch, that's what I'm saying is the domino effect. I mean, and I don't know how many ranches are in a situation where that vacant land's that critical. Obviously it's vacant. So there was a lessee that was there that's no longer there. What happened? What caused that vacancy? And that's what I'm saying. If they push you out of business,
I believe that they're so rare that I didn't even know that there were vacant state lands that existed in Wyoming. That's how rare I think this is, but you're going to get into some
well, and
fairly
that's,
remote
Mr.
spots.
Chairman, once again, based off of this is real life, it's not a theoretical scenario. If it comes down to who can afford the most expensive attorneys, which is the current situation, the current situation favors those large conglomerates. So this helps, and we can't dictate outcomes in legislation, but we can set up a process that's going to make it more fair.
Okay. Senator, have you seen this amendment? Okay.
I just became aware of it 5 minutes before we started the meeting.
Okay.
I think that it does help. A lot of it's helps provide clarity. Looks like I'm going over it with you as we speak. The idea to, let's see, page 3, lines 6 and 7. Strike at live auction. So read, the director shall request a final bid from the applicants eligible for preference in a manner directed. So it'd be striking the live auction part and just leaving up to state lands to determine in those very rare circumstances, if you have two adjoining landowners going after the same piece of vacant land, we just leave it up to the agency instead of doing the live auction. So
Right.
I prefer the live auction, but it's not, I'm not gonna die on this, so I really don't. I mean,
Okay,
so committee, do what you want, you know?
the amendment, was this brought by the SLIB board?
I believe
No,
it's
it
the
was
stock
brought-
growers.
Stock growers, okay. We'll have them address that. One way of having a live auction that's, could be a fairly easy way of doing it would be an online type of an auction, and I think you could do it in a Zoom meeting, so we could still have, a live auction. That would involve both of the people at the same time that are interested, or all of the parties interested in the parcel. So I think committee, we're gonna move to state lands. I think that'll be the next place we go. Jason, are you on? Available?
Mr. Chairman, I'm bringing in Director Scoggins.
Okay. Welcome to our meeting, Director.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and yes, I do have Deputy Director Crowder alongside me here. He's been working in the weeds, if you will, on this bill, and we have certainly had discussions with stock growers and with Chairman Boner and Representative Walters, and made some suggestions and whatnot. But if it's okay with you, Mr. Chairman, we are aware of the proposed changes by stock growers, and so perhaps it would be best if stock growers presented their proposed changes, and then we could certainly backfill and comment after that.
Okay, well, stay nearby. Mr. McGagnon, huh? Yes. Okay, why don't you just stay put, Senator, and Mr. McGagnon, would you come forward and explain this amendment and why you see a need for eliminating the live auction part?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jim McGagnon with the Wyoming Stockgrowers Association. Mr. Chairman, did you want me to just address the amendment at this point, or our comments on the bill as well?
Probably the whole thing.
The whole
why-
thing.
And then go into the amendments.
Okay, well, thank you,
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman. And just very briefly, we're very supportive of this bill. It's some just clarification that's been needed in this section of our statutes. The current statute really runs together certain things that are fundamental requirements to be eligible to hold a lease, and the one item that is not a requirement but is a preference, and that's ownership of adjacent lands, or control of adjacent lands, not necessarily ownership. So we think overall this is a very good bill, and we certainly support it. It doesn't change a lot of what's already there. It simply provides clarification. It lets potential lessees of vacant lands understand the process and know what that process is going to be in advance, instead of sitting back wondering, well, what's going to happen next? So we think that's really important. I might just quickly address the concern that was expressed by Representative Fortner. And there is another section in the statute, 36.5.110, that talks about improvements, authorization to make them, and the right to be reimbursed if those are, if you lose the lease. So that I believe is very adequately covered in current law. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I would just address the amendment that I've proposed to you. The biggest part of that amendment, in earlier work that was done on the bill, the term qualified was inserted in front of applicant for vacant. This is all about vacant leases, to say that you have to meet some certain qualifications. The land office can look at and say, you know, you've had other state leases and you've not taken care of the land, or you've always been delinquent in paying your rental rates, would give the board the opportunity to say, this is not a qualified applicant. So we think that discretion needs to be left to the Office of State Lands and the Board of Land Commissioners. All I'm doing with this amendment is inserting that term in certain places where it didn't get put in the first time. So it's consistent throughout the bill, throughout this section of the statute, that we're using the term qualified. So that's really just more of a technical change. And then in a couple of places where it talks about in good standing with the board, that again, that is covered by qualified. So just for consistency, using that term throughout the bill. The other change that and then I did add a definition of qualified in order that we can know what that really means. The other change that I did make, and this is more substantive, and the Chairman Boner mentioned this, is to strike the mandate that if there are two qualified bidders, and these could be two qualified bidders, both of whom have adjacent lands, have a preference, or it could be two qualified bidders, neither of whom has adjacent lands, but they both submitted bids. To say that we would then go to a live auction, and we have several concerns with a live auction. For those of you who, like I, have ever been to a bull sale or a ram sale, some people are just better at doing it than others. Some of us have gone and bought the animal we really wanted and then come home and looked at our checkbook and said, gee, I spent more money I ever should have. And in this case, with an auction, you're making a commitment for 10 years if you're the successful bidder, that you're going to keep that land, care for it, and submit the annual rental payments. And we think that is a more thoughtful process in most instances. If it's an opportunity to submit a written bid, you can sit down, you can look at your finances, you can look at how the land affects your operation, and more thoughtfully decide, what can I afford to bid on this piece of land? So this change would not preclude a live auction, but it would let the office in conjunction with the board determine when that's appropriate and when it may not be appropriate. So that's really the only significant change from my perspective that we're offering in this is removing that requirement. And I would say as to that I've been contacted by some of our members who are young producers just getting started in the business, and a parcel of state land can be very critical to that if it becomes available, because they can't afford in today's retail markets to buy a lot of private land, but they can acquire a little bit and then get some adjacent state parcels. And they expressed concern with having to go into a live auction against perhaps another bidder who's experienced and has been bidding at auctions for one thing or another through their lifetime. And suddenly I'm put up against that person. So we think that flexibility to use a live auction or to ask for submission of written bids should remain with the Board of Land Commissioners and the Land Office. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
Representative Clausen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Mr. McGagna. I guess I'm not tracking this live auction portion. So in a written bid portion, you could end up with the same scenario, just one person blows the other person out of the water. With this live auction option, I think it actually clears it up, and it would give the person right there where they were going to need to be. And I think that leans towards more of an easier process. Just take me down while you're headed down this road.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Clausen, and I certainly see the merit in what you're saying. We just think it creates some pressures that don't otherwise exist on people, and going through a process like that. Also, have some question as to whether these Office of State Lands and Investments, who have staff that are very capable in many things, I don't know that they have staff that's experienced in running a live auction. Chairman Eklund mentioned maybe doing a Zoom or something. Well, we have some producers that walk around with their flip phone yet, and they're not going to participate in a Zoom. It just seems that it's a more traditional way, a more broadly accepted way among the whole array of the ranching community out there who would be the parties applying for this land.
Mr. McGagna, you just ran the Speaker of the House off. He has a flip phone. So that being said, will the process as written in statute in conjunction with the new rule changes allow for a bidding process to happen? You've got two or more bidders, and it doesn't end with one person without at some point contacting the other person to allow them to offer another bid, even if it's a written a written process or some other process that doesn't involve a live auction.
Mr. Chairman, that's our reading of the bill, that it would, if you have two equally qualified bidders or two or more, and they could both have a preference with adjacent land, or none of them have a preference with adjacent land. In either case, then this would allow and would direct the land office to take that second step of stepping out for a new round of bids, whether they do it,
Okay,
choose to do it in writing, or whether they choose to do it through a live auction.
all right. So we need to be sure that that's part of this bill, because I think it caused some of the confusion and difficulty in a situation in Converse County. Okay, Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Magagna, I'm a little confused on the last line of your proposed amendment. It says page 4, line 19, insert those words, but as I look on the engrossed copy, that is a section header line.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Heiner, you've caught me at something that I've never quite figured out. I guess I should have said after line 18, but line 18 is a blank line. So in effect, what this would do, if you were truly authoring a formal amendment as LSO would do, you would do this on line 19, and then the current line 19 would be shifted down to the end of this, wherever it is. But that's, I thought about that when I was drafting it, and was quite a little unsure at 6 o'clock this morning how to express that in the most appropriate manner. Thank you for the question.
Representative Wharf.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to make sure that there isn't an error and we missed someplace, but I noticed you do page 2, line 15 after 2, insert qualified. And then 2 spots down, you repeat that. I didn't know if that's a mistake that it was repeated, or if you didn't change it from page 2 to line 15 to a different one. Is there another place where qualified needs to be inserted? I just didn't want to miss that if there's another place that qualified is supposed to be
Mr.
inserted.
Chairman, Representative Wharf, you've just uncovered another place that in my haste this morning, I duplicated. That's.
So it's just a
yes. So
duplication?
One of
Okay.
those should be stricken from the amendment.
I just didn't want to miss one,
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman. That's why I bring that up. Thank you.
And when we do this, when the LSO does this amendment, we'll make sure that we find all of these corrections, any of them that need to be done. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Magagna.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Members of the public, any testimony on this bill? Yeah, I will. Come on up, Marguerite. We haven't forgotten the state. We'll get back to you. There may be other things that arise during testimony, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee. My name is Marguerite Herman. I'm here as a member of a group called the Advocates for School Trust Lands, and it's a membership organization that advocates for the management of school trusts, the land, and the funds throughout the West, because the Western states are mostly the states that have any school trust lands left. And so I'm very interested in this because especially that in your part to the greatest benefit of the beneficiaries, that's where our group is really focused on. This is the land was given to the state for the beneficiaries who are the school children. So I want to sort of incorporate what Mr. Magagna said a bit. And I consulted with the Office of State Lands and Investment, Director Scoggin and Assistant Director Crowder, and just to get some more information. And I have sort of specific places, and I haven't seen Mr. Magagna's amendment, but I'll just go through, I guess, first of all, to respond to the question about does the director actually decide who gets the lease? And the director does not decide. The director recommends to the Board of Land Commissioners. The Board of Land Commissioners approves every lease, not the director. The director can only, well, and, recommends with copious amounts of research and, backs it up. But ultimately, the director doesn't decide anything on his or her own, just to clarify that. And I want to thank the sponsor of this bill because straightening out preferred versus a preference versus preferred right, because they are kind of muddled in statute. And to clarify this whole preference thing, which actually the Board of Land Commissioners was in the process of clarifying through rulemaking. And because of a disputed award recommendation of a lease that came before the Board of Land Commissioners, and it turned out they just discovered the rulemaking, and which does have the benefit of being exposed to the public comment for 45 days, which statutes do not, but I appreciate the effort to clarify it here. And apropos of that, I would agree with Mr. Magagna that to include a definition of qualified, and I found a place that it could go. Let's see, on page 4, there's a definition of preference, a definition of vacant land, and I would suggest you could have a C, qualified applicant, means a bidder who meets the criteria pursuant to subsection B of this section and who is determined by the board to comply with subsection A of this section. So you have subsection B in here. Subsection A is basically the inure to the greatest benefit, and B is, as on page 2, all those other qualifications. You're a good steward of the land, you're going to use it well, et cetera. You're a resident of the state. So then when qualified is used throughout, then people can go, and what does that mean? And then, so that would be a place where you could, what is a qualified applicant, go to that point and then apply it later. And in those 2 spots where I think Mr. Magagna pointed it out. So like on page 2, preference shall be given to qualified applicants. Then again, incorporating that little a and little b. And then beneath that in A, in instances where one qualified applicant is eligible for the preference. And then I would put the little parens S after competing bidder, because it may be more than one bidder. So bidders, anyway, that would be my recommendation there. And it would be probably good just to put that in statute along with the other definitions. And on the subject of live auctions, talking to OSLI, their comment to me was that live auctions may be costly when compared to other forms of competitive bidding. To maximize revenue in a competitive situation, OSLI has seen sealed bids return higher bids. Live auctions allow competitors to bid slightly higher than another bidder to be successful. Sealed bids or highest and best offers not viewable by the competitors have brought higher bids. So the suggested wording, I just throw it out here instead of, after request there on line 5, instead of the reference to the live auction, the director shall request a highest and best offer from the qualified applicants eligible for the preference. So it could be verbal, it could be in writing. The director shall request highest and best bid. And that would be then up to the director how to receive those. But that's just draws on their experience. I just offer it as that's their experience of live auction versus the other form of bidding.
So we will have to run all of this through the
Of
LSO,
course.
and we'll have to make sure that it conforms with existing statute.
Of course.
Okay.
So, sorry.
So
And then and I know you're in a hurry, so I'll try to be really quick. So on line 13 of that page, I would just suggest adding of the applicants not eligible. Okay, so at the end of the first sentence, to match the highest bid of the applicants. So you see, you've got all these qualified people, some preference, some not. And we just want to make sure that the preference people have to meet the highest bid by the non-preference people. You can't just go to the lowest AUM, just to make sure that everybody is doing the highest bid, even if the bid you're beating comes from a non-preferred bidder. That makes sense. Just to make sure you're starting, that's what you have to beat, not a minimum, but the last best offer from whether the person has preference or not.
well, there will be, in this particular cleanup, there will be qualified bidders. And those are laid out in this statute, and they're basically cleaning up things. So
Mr. Chairman, yeah, and I can sense you're eager to get me off this. And I would just say, and then I would agree with Mr. Magagna about in good standing is a status that will be established by the board and the director. So that probably doesn't need to be in here, can just be deleted. And that's it. And I thank you for your time. And I'll take any questions if you have any.
Okay,
Otherwise.
thank you. Committee? All right. Mr. Moline, come on up.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau, sitting in support of this bill. Agree with most of the amendments that Mr. McGagnon brought forward. Kind of ambivalent on the live auction. I kind of like the idea of having one. In one aspect, it's settled. And you know it earlier when at the end of the live auction, you know what the price is, you know if you got it or if you didn't. And I would like to address one comment about losing a lease. That's what happens when you lease. You always have that aspect that you could lose a lease. It's happened to my family. We've been outbid on something that we've leased for 10 years. We've outbid other people, but that's the trouble with a lease rather than owning. You always have the chance of losing it. But sitting in support of this bill, Mr. Chairman, I'm trying to be brief, so I'll sit for any questions from you or the committee.
No questions. Thank you,
Thank you.
Mr. Moline. Okay. Welcome to our committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Christy Racina, State Auditor. I'll try my best to be brief. So you all know I'm one of the more green members of the Board of Land Commissioners, but I've been on it pushing 2.5 years, and we have had the pleasure of having several of these very, very contentious vacant land leases come up before us, whether that is normal course or whether it has just been a dynamic couple of years, I don't know. And I can tell you the clarification that's presented in this bill is very, very much appreciated. And in particular, the section 365105B on the first half of page 2 has been the focus of our discussion. And we have received various advice that section can be interpreted different ways. So I think it is ripe for clarification. And I only speak for myself, Mr. Chairman, but I can tell you that many of our conversations as a board that have been had in public, so I can say this, have been around the frustration that there was no avenue in statute for us to sort of mirror the process of having an applicant be able to match a bid. So if you already lease a land, you have that ability to match a bid. If somebody comes in and comes after, and comes after the lease you hold on vacant lands, and we've tried, there's no statutory avenue to say, oh, okay, Chairman Eklund bid $2 more than Representative Larson, but we know Representative Larson has the next door land. He's going to be a better steward. There was no ability for us to say, okay, will you raise your bid to $2? So I think that is at least I would appreciate that guidance and leeway. The other comment I would make, Mr. Chairman, in regards to something Representative Western said is the board or director required to accept the highest bid? And you don't see that in here. And I believe the answer is no. And I think that is extremely important. I think it's critical that the board maintain some discretion. And I'll refer to the preference definition on page 4, where it defines preference, which I think is a good thing. You may say, well, gosh, that's a little bit squishy. Well, preference by its nature is squishy. And here's why that's important. If we were to have someone who, and these are few and far between, but was a bad actor or the lease had been canceled for non-payment, they can come back in and be the highest bidder, and we would be required to accept that bid, even when we know they have a poor track record. So that discretion is important. And I think, I'm not an attorney, Mr. Chairman, but I think that keeps us on the right side of the Constitution as well as far as the Board of Land Commissioners control with direction by the legislature of the state lands to maintain that discretion. Mr. Chairman, I think I'll stop there in the interest of time, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
The word qualified would take care of your concerns with what the board needs for discretion, correct?
Mr. Chairman, I think it does, and I think the reason I bring that up, Mr. Chairman, is there has been through the course of the bill an evolution of the definition of preference. And I think the one that stands in the bill right now is favorable for us maintaining that discretion. A prior definition defined it as a right, and I think that's where we could get maybe into some challenges.
Okay. I am trying to read in page 4, line 3. After of strike and I'm looking at the amendment.
Oh, and
that's been
Mr.
brought.
Chairman,
I'm
I
sorry.
apologize. I don't have that.
But I think this is going to fix the concerns that the SLIB board would have.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think, and again, speaking only for myself, certainly not the entire board, and OSLI will come in and hopefully correct anything I've told you wrong.
I would agree. Okay. Well, thank you. I don't see any questions from yeah, I do. We have one. Representative Larson.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Thank you for being here. It's good to have a member of the SLIB here to kind of discuss some of your concerns. If we went to a live auction, I would guess you would rather that happen through the director's office and then come forward. I wouldn't think you would want to be part of the auction. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, I think that's the way that it would go, that would largely be an administrative function by the OSLI.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
You're always welcome at our meeting. I don't generally see any of our elected forces.
Well, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. And now I have to run because we actually have a SLIB meeting in 8
Ah.
minutes. So
Yeah, that we're invited to, and
Yes.
sorry, we'll miss it. Okay. I'm going to go to state lands now. If I may, Mrs. Scoggins, are you still on the
Yes.
line?
Mr. Chairman, we are still here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. As I think most of the testimony has been today, the board does have a wide discretion with respect to leasing state lands. And it's important to maintain the board's ability to determine whether or not those leasing decisions inure to the greatest benefit of the trust beneficiaries. What I've learned in my short tenure here is that leasing can be very nuanced. It's fact specific. And so it's difficult to address all situations in a one size fits all statute or rule or whatever. And so it's important that the board does maintain some flexibility to, in fact, address those situations that have been brought up, the concerns based on the specific facts of the case. And that's why generally you see procedure written in rule as opposed to statute. But nevertheless, I think some of the concerns that we've had and that were expressed by Ms. Herman and perhaps stock growers and also Auditor Racinas, I think can be addressed through that definition of qualified applicant. And I think just in what we've heard this morning, we liked the definition provided by Ms. Herman that also included not only the reference to section B, but also the reference to section A of 365105, just because then it's clear that the board is in fact maintaining that ability to look at it and to decide what's going to inure to the greatest benefit of the trust beneficiaries. The other thing I would say, there's been discussion about whether to do an auction or whether the highest best offer is the route to go. And certainly we can do whatever it is that the committee would like us to do. We do not have specific experience with holding a live auction, but certainly we can figure out a procedure to do so. And Deputy Director Crowder here has a lot more experience than I do in dealing with the highest and best offer situation, but I believe it's been his experience that those generally return more funds, if you will, for the trust beneficiaries. But I would defer to Deputy Director Crowder to maybe express his thoughts on that.
Yeah, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think the perspective that you look at that situation is important. The live auction obviously allows the two adjoining landowners to know what each other is bidding and allow them to compete in that way. Our perspective is always on what inures to the greatest benefit. And when you are talking about an auction scenario, it's the dollars and cents that are returned from there and the applicant who is the best, not who wishes to bid over another. So that's where we have always believed that a highest and best offer or a sealed bid in many cases, again, as the director mentioned, every situation is a little bit different. But in many cases, those are the responsible bids that come in. Those are the sustainable bids that come in, and they really help us understand who may be inuring to the greatest benefit.
And with that, Mr. Chairman, I think we would stand for questions. I don't have anything else to add. Deputy, do you?
No, and maybe I would just add, Mr. Chairman, quickly, for the rest of the members of the committee, the process that's laid out here is kind of the end of the process. We have a beginning, a letting of applications. We reach out to all the adjoining landowners and anybody else who's expressed interest or anybody else we feel may be interested. And we ask for applications from those individuals. Those applications are not considered completed in full unless they have an offer associated with them. And that's when this process and statute is really kicked off, is after we've received all of those initial sealed bid offers, we understand what we have and who we're dealing with, then we would employ this process. I just wanted to make sure that that was clear. Okay. Thank you. Senator Boner, you're the prime sponsor on this. I need some thoughts from you on how we're going to, or if we need to change the bill at all.
Okay, well, Mr. Chairman, I think it's important that if anybody's going to submit an amendment, they need to do it in writing, obviously. And so it's well thought out. I'll tell you that we've gone through many different iterations of this bill and everybody has their own, you talk to somebody different, they're going to have their own way of making sure that we get to the same goals. So I don't think that the Stockhorse Amendment, I think it'll be okay. The only substantive change is the live auction. I leave that to the committee's discretion. Other than that, I would resist kind of this meaningless, constantly shifting around words that, because at this station in the game, because it has been thoroughly vetted by state lands and advocates for producers. This has been thoroughly, and I just don't want an endless feedback loop that ultimately leads us nowhere on the exact wording of the bill. So not necessarily opposed to any ideas, other ideas proposed, but I think that absolutely does have to be in writing, and that would be a good consideration for a committee of the whole amendment if the amendment is ready. So and same thing. I think we highlight some concerns about some of the technical parts of the Stockhorse Amendment, and that it was only made apparently an hour before this meeting, in spite of this being an ongoing discussion for months. So do what you think's best, Mr. Chairman, as far as whether it's a sustaining committee amendment or not. The only substantive part, from what I can tell, is the deletion of the live auction, leaving it up to the state lands as to how they're going to deal with those situations. So it is a balance. Obviously, we have to give them discretion, but clearly that discretion has led to some really tough situations where folks felt like they've been treated fairly, and so the guidance is absolutely needed as well.
Okay, thank you. Representative Fortner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Live auction, are we talking like there are two competing leases going into like a Zoom station, or are we going to do like YouTube, or how's that set up? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, it's up to the board. They can do it however they want as far as executing. Obviously, I imagine be up to the folks bidding what their preference is. So we're not going to dictate that in statute.
Okay. Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, I'm concerned about this highest and best offer sealed bid type scenario because the old lessee has the preferred right to match the highest bid. So there's no incentive for him to offer a high bid because in the end, he gets to match whatever that is from the other applicant. So I'm a little bit reserved about going away from the auction scenario and going to just a sealed bid because I don't think we'll maximize our values that way.
This will be vacant land. So it's going to be, this portion of the build is trying to clear up what we normally do. That part of statute is going to remain the same, correct, Senator?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we're just, so that's for land that has a current bid or current lease on it, that we're not really changing much in that. This is just for vacant land. And
There's no leasee on this.
right, just for
property.
vacant
Okay.
land.
Yes.
So on page 4, we talk about the old lessee and preferred right in that section, how they have 15 days notice by registered mail to accept and pay the additional rent. So I don't understand how that fits into a vacant land.
Mr. Chairman, it doesn't. That's that's a completely different section of statute. And so the way it's constructed, it's not clear from the bill because there's things we're not changing. And as a result, they're not in the bill, right? So section 105, there's A, B, and C. B deals with vacant land. C is land that has current lease. And so a completely different section, section 108. All of that's saying, it's a long-winded way of saying that if everything else is the same and and the old lessee is basically given up the lease, we're just going to give preference to the individual that's closest to the land. That's all that paragraph says. It has nothing to do with the process. And the reason why it's there is that we're just striking preference, mostly putting preferred right to ensure consistency with the, a current lease as opposed to vacant land.
Representative Wharf.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Boner, who pays the fee for the auctioneer? Does that come out of the bid price? Is that in addition to the bid price? I just wondered, I didn't see that addressed here, and I'm assuming that they could do that through their process, but just wondered if you'd thought about how that should be handled.
Mr. Chairman, I think that'd be, like we discussed, up to state lands. And, I remember hearing before that they had in fact done some sort of live auction. It's not an actual, it's a state employee just saying who's going to, it's not like an actual auctioneer where that, a professional auctioneer. And so I was a little confused to hear that apparently that's changed. The state lands testimony has changed since I last talked to them as to whether they do live auctions or not. Maybe not in this particular circumstance, but that is my understanding that they have done live auctions before and maybe in different scenarios. And so I think I would need some clarification on what the reality is, because that's different from what I've heard before. And also I think Representative Wharf had a very good question about how they look at folks who are catty corner, if that counts as adjoining or not. So I think those are two outstanding questions for state lands.
Yeah, state lands still on. Could you answer that for us?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, absolutely. And I think Senator Boner is correct. We do live auctions in many different forms for oil and gas leasing, for hard rock leasing, and we've done a couple for grazing and even for outfitting rights. And we do them in a variety of different ways. Some of them are done by auctioneer and the office absorbs that through our operational budget to pay that auctioneer. Senator Boner is also correct that I myself and a couple other state employees have sat in front of a room and accepted bids. We've not attempted to do the auctioneer cadence, but we've accepted bids in that way. And most recently, and mostly in our oil and gas world, we've done it online through an online medium and allowed them to do that effort for us. They charge a premium back to the successful bidder, usually 1% to 2%, and we don't have to pay for that. That's added on top of their bid. But if we do hire an auctioneer, we typically pay through our operational budget. There's no way to charge that back currently to the successful applicant. Okay. And we've not had the opportunity to define adjoining lands, and we've not had the experience yet to have somebody who just had a corner crossing access or corner crossing proximity to a lease. And so I think if we were presented with that situation, we'd have the AG's office help inform us on how that preference should be applied at that point.
Okay. So. we're
Thank you,
unclear
Mr.
on-
Chairman. I appreciate you getting that answered for me.
Okay. You're welcome. Okay. Bill's been moved by
Second.
Representative. Okay, well, I think we did. Any further testimony?
We did that.
Okay. All right, the bill has been moved by Representative Larson. Huh? Oh, and an amendment. Seconded by Worf. Discussion on the bill. Representative Larson.
Mr. Chairman, I think I'm gonna work with the amendment that was proposed, but I don't like all of it. So
Okay,
I'd like to insert on page 2, line 15, after "to qualified." I like that. I
Okay.
don't like the "in good standing with the board." I want to leave that, so don't do that. Page 3, line 6, I want to leave that. I like the live auction issue. I think that's a good idea. I
Okay.
think they can figure out how to do it. Page 4, line 3, after "of" strike "and," insert "a qualified."
okay, leave that.
No, I want to insert "a qualified." On page 4, line 7 and 8, I want to leave that. I want to leave "in good standing with the board." And then page 4, line 18, I'd like to I don't think it's 19. I want to insert what they suggested. Qualified own applicant means a bidder who meets the criteria established by the subsection B of this section.
Okay,
Second that.
and seconded by Heiner. Any discussion on that amendment? You have that, Carol? Okay, all right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. That has passed. Any further discussion on the bill? Question on the bill. We'll make sure you have that information. We did it pretty fast. Go ahead.
Representative Blackburn,
Aye.
Vice Chair Clausen,
Aye.
Representative Fortner,
Aye.
Representative Heiner,
Aye.
Representative Larson,
Aye.
Representative Western,
Aye.
Representative Worf,
Aye.
Representative Winter,
Aye.
Chairman Eklund.
Aye.
Chairman Eklund, there are 9 ayes.
So Senate File 114 has passed the House Ag Committee. The next bill for our consideration, and is the Ag Authority Bill. I'm trying to find the number. It is Senate File 122. Again, we have the prime sponsor. When you're ready, go ahead, Senator Boner.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's good to be back here. So what you have here is a bill that would begin the process of establishing what is called the Wyoming Agriculture Authority. This was a topic, and many of you remember, we were discussing or started discussing with over the interim. The bill that we had at that time wasn't quite ready. This is going to be a huge lift, and so we didn't quite sponsor it as a committee bill, but I continued working the concept. And so what we have here is a personal bill that is really kind of a result of our interim work. Now, this is in response and acknowledging the changes in how our processing of commodities, especially meat processing, has been pretty clear how that has changed significantly in the past 10 to 15 years, with large multinational monopolies controlling the market, and as a result, controlling the economics of producers throughout the state. And so what this does is it copies basically the Energy Authority, and it acknowledges that this is not an even playing field that a lot of these large monopolies are either owned outright. One of the top four is owned by the Chinese Communist Party. Another one is heavily subsidized by a government in South America. So it's simply saying that this very fragile, very unreliable meat processing situation we have is unacceptable for everybody. It's unacceptable for consumers. It's unacceptable for producers who have to get their product to market. And we're going to see what we can do to incentivize a more resilient processing capacity. It's modeled on the Energy Authority, and it's something that we can do to build up and reorganize the way state government deals with agriculture. Even though the impetus of the bill is dealing with meat processing, the Ag Authority is meant to be broad and apply to any and all facets of agriculture in the state. Certainly the current crisis is dealing with meat processing, but who's to say the next one wouldn't be with wheat or sugar beets or wool or whatever the case may be. We're trying to be thoughtful and making a big step forward for Wyoming agriculture. So the idea here is it's based off the Energy Authority, which was the old Pipeline Authority and the old Infrastructure Authority combined. We recently combined those in the past year or two. But the experience there was that much like agriculture, there's been some areas that say for a pipeline, it's similar to a meat processing plant, right? It's what gets that commodity to the market. And the experience with the old Pipeline Authority, at least, was that just its very existence, its ability to go out and finance this infrastructure was an incentive for the private sector to actually go out and do it. And so that's the goal here, is that we're hoping with just the very existence of this Ag Authority will incentivize more development of small to mid-sized processing plants. And I'll show how we do that in the bill here. But also it's an opportunity to reorganize. That's really important too. The most obvious criticism at face value is, oh, here's another state agency, we're going to be growing government. But, it's the way we avoid that, and it's going to be up to this committee and your counterpart in the Senate, is by reorganizing and consolidating some agencies. So we can gain an agency, we can consolidate an agency. The idea being that the Department of Agriculture should focus on consumer protection, those regulatory functions. We let the Ag Authority focus on supporting agriculture, being advocates for agriculture, being more entrepreneurial. It's two different mindsets. And so we can do that just simply and we can fund this new authority either from the savings we realize by consolidating other functions that are spread across multiple agencies in a single agency that deal with regulation. But also, just to give you an example, the Beef Council would be an obvious fit for under the Ag Authority. Their budget is exactly the same as the Energy Authority, or very close. So that'd be one way that we could help fund the Ag Authority, simply by moving that one element that's currently under the Department of Ag to the Agriculture Authority. So want to make sure that's another important part of the bill. It's going to be, if the bill moves forward, a significant part of our interim work on this committee, figuring out how, which functions to move, which ones to retain, what to consolidate, what to not do. So looking across to this committee, I know my Senate Ag Committee in the Senate, we're probably one of the more conservative committees. It looks like it might be the same situation here. And so you don't have to trust anybody except yourself that we're not going to grow government, because it's going to be up to this committee to figure out how that works in the interim. So it's important to understand the timeline too. All that this bill really does is it establishes the board. It gets it going. If you look on the engrossed copy, page 4-3, kind of there at the bottom, the authority commences July 1st, 2022. So it actually gets going a year and a half from now. But we get the board going, because I think it's important to interact with the board as we stand this up over the interim. And so all that we're really doing with this bill is establishing the board and getting setting the starting point for the other policy considerations that are going to surround the Wyoming Agriculture Authority. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll go into the most pertinent part of the bill, which starts on page 3. Once again, talked about the 2022 start date for the authority. But go on to page 4, paragraph B. This is the important part that we have to get off, correct right off the bat, talking about the board. So right now it's a 7-member board. Once again, this is based off the Energy Authority. A majority of the persons on the board have to be Wyomingites. So majority, but not all, have to be from Wyoming. Top of page 5, this is very important. We define, they have to be involved in the agriculture industry, and we define what that means. So that's an important concept there too. So top of page 5, that means work related to science, art, business, or finance, and cultivating soil, producing crops, or raising livestock, or the support of such work. So the idea is, say, take beef, for example. You can have somebody who owns a feedlot, doesn't necessarily have to be a producer, but they're still involved with, producing beef cattle for market. Then we have the makeup of the board a little bit further down on page 5, the engrossed copy. 2 members in beef production, 1 in sheep production, 2 members in crop production, 1 in agricultural processing. So plenty of folks who are currently in the business of meat processing, for example. So they have a seat on the board, as well as somebody with agribusiness financing experience. And that's important for the other part of the bill, or one of the parts of the authority, is that an advantage is similar to the pipeline authority. You have an opportunity to offer low interest loans based off the municipal bond rate, And so it's similar to, say, to give you a more operative example, the Wyoming Community Development Authority, which offers lower interest loans for first-time home buyers, for example. And so that's the board. That's what we're going to get going right off the bat. The rest of the bill is, and of course, we have ex officio members, governor, director of the Department of Agriculture, dean of the College of Agriculture at UW, and the CEO of the Business Council. So, Mr. Chairman, that's, I'll go ahead and pause there if that's okay. And then we can go through the rest of the bill. But I want to make a clear distinction between what is going to be effective July of this year and what's going to be effective July of 2022. So I'll just go ahead and pause there in the explanation of the bill, if that's okay.
Thank you, Senator. So committee, tracking pretty well thus far. Okay. Thank you for making that distinction. I don't think I sorted it out when I was reading the bill. I appreciate that.
All right. Yeah, it is 30 pages longer than I usually like it to be, but but that's I mean, it's a big step forward for Wyoming Ag. So okay, so I guess if that's okay, then we'll go with the rest of the bill. Once again, this is something that if the bill passes, we're going to consider over the next interim as well. If there's things we need to fine tune, I mean, certainly, don't be afraid to take a crack at it now, but we're gonna have opportunities to continue to refine this language over the interim as well. Once again, this is based off the Energy Authority. So a lot, especially as we get towards the last part of the bill, dealing with the specifics of how the bonds work and everything, that's taken verbatim from the Energy Authority. It's worked well for them. So I didn't see, there's not much we changed. I'll certainly highlight the things that we did change. But, starting with the definitions. So like I said, going back on page 2, agricultural processing, that's important. We're including meat, crop, and other agricultural products. So it's meant to be broad. Like I said, the current crisis is with meat processing, but who knows what the next challenge may be. Maybe it'll be with sugar beets, maybe it'll be with wheat, maybe be with wool. You never know. That's an important definition of agricultural processing. So like I thought I would highlight that. Definition for a processing facility and project is based off of that definition there on the rest of the page. Everything else is fairly straightforward. So moving on to page 6, I already covered kind of the rest of it. Just standard boilerplate stuff. It says that the board has to meet at least 2 times a year. Certainly they can meet more. We have to follow the rules with appointments. You have to go on top page 7. Those references to statutes are the Administrative Public Records Act, Public Records Act, standard stuff that boards have to comply with. And, once again, making sure that the sole recourse of a party contracting authority is not against the state, it's against the authority. So similar to the Energy Authority, it's its own body politic of its own nature, and there's no recourse against the state itself, if that makes sense. That's an important concept for a little bit later. And so we have kind of the marching orders at the top of page 8, why the authority is created. And so that's kind of the broad idea of what their mission is, if you will, kind of the mission statement. So diversifying, expanding Wyoming's economy, and coordinating strategies with the Department of Ag. Obviously, they're going to be working close together since the Department of Ag is the regulatory arm. Once again, I still think it's awkward to have the regulatory arm and the arm that's supposed to be, or the department that regulates, be the same as the one that supports and advocates for agriculture. But they're still going to be coordinating. We're just acknowledging that fact, and just providing assistance. That's really important, because one of the biggest barriers to entry for these meat processing plants is the federal regulatory environment. One might say that it's even been weaponized to keep people out of the market. The challenges associated with getting USDA certification are so onerous. It really only fits the business model of these large packers. And so anything that we can do to help with getting through and checking those boxes, I think is going to be beneficial and could be one way. We can't change federal law, but we can help folks comply with it, especially think how intimidating that is for a small to mid-sized plant that wants to get going. So that's another opportunity the authority can really help out with. And so then we have the powers of the authority. Once again, this is based off the Energy Authority, nothing new here. It just says all the things that they may do, not requiring anything, but it empowers them to do all these kind of basic things, employ people, utilize contracts, coordinate with other agencies. Once again, provide the loans we talked about, provide, once again, on page 10, paragraph 5, talk about that technical assistance that's so important with permitting, siting, and other regulatory requirements. So just a laundry list, they can receive gifts if we appropriate some money for something later, but they can do that. It's all permissive here. Collect fees if they feel the need. So that's so talk about, once again, the sort of delineation between this authority and the Department of Ag. They're going to engage with international and domestic stakeholders, do that marketing side of it as well. And once again, just giving them broad authority, not a whole lot different from the Energy Authority. I figure if it's not broken, we don't need to fix, no need to fix it. So an important concept on page 12, starting on page 12, it's really important that this entity does not compete with the private sector. And so that's a provision here. It says explicitly, the authority shall not exercise any of their rights granted to it if private persons, firms, or corporations are performing the acts that they're trying to perform. And we take that so seriously on paragraph E, we have a very specific procedure in statute to ensure that that competition does not happen. So if they are proposing an action, they have to basically publish it in a statewide publication as well as in the local area where the facility may be. They have to wait 90 days for somebody to respond to take on that project. And then that if somebody does respond to go ahead and take on that project, they have to actually start doing within 180 days. And that's really important. Like I said, the experience of the pipeline authority is that they very rarely had to issue these loans for these projects. In fact, there's one instance where they started down the process and somebody jumped and said, oh, wait, never mind, we're going to do it. and so I think that's a really important concept is, and when we start talking about these elements of providing these loans, it's going to be more like the Energy Authority than, say, the Community Development Authority that has all of these loans out right now, a bunch of little loans for people's houses. The Energy Authority has no loans at all out. So it's important to understand that the capability exists, but it's hopefully going to be used very rarely, if at all. And so that's an important concept. And that this is an important part of that concept, ensuring that the private sector has all the opportunity in the world to go ahead and step in, and so that we can ensure that we're not, this entity isn't competing with the private sector at all. And so going on to page 15, we're talking about the specifics of the loans. You can't have a loan any more than $50 million for any one project. That's different from the Energy Authority. I think that's $1 billion for the Energy Authority. So quite a bit less than the Energy Authority. And we want to preclude some of these larger facilities, which frankly seem to be part of the problem. And those are really running over $100 million. So we want to make sure we're focused on mid to small sized plants with this authority. And that's why you have the $50 million there. Talking about the interest rates on paragraph B of page 15. It can't be less, we set a floor of 1%. And that's different from the Energy Authority. It's actually 2% for the Energy Authority. And there's no magic behind that number. And frankly, it could be 2%. I won't really care. I was just looking at the municipal bond rate when I made this bill, it's like 0.7%, so just acknowledging the incredibly low bond rates that we have currently, but maybe that'll change before we get through this bill, who knows? So I'd like to highlight that difference. Moving on to page 18, once again, this is all language that's taken from the Energy Authority that has worked well there. Just highlighting the differences here, page 18. There's a maximum total amount of loans that the authority can have out. It's at $250 million. So we had a $50 million limit for just one project and there's also an additional limit saying you can have no more than 250 million out in total. Once again, to compare with the Energy Authority, it's $3 billion with the Energy Authority. So we've taken that down significantly. And once again, the experience of the Energy Authority was, I think they had one loan out one time for like $30 million. What was it? I think that's what they testified in committee, and they just paid it off. As it happened once in the decades that the Pipeline Authority, now the Energy Authority, has been in existence. So once again, the idea that this is here hopefully will spur more aggressive development in the private sector. Another very important concept on line 19. Once again, this is boilerplate, but something I'd highlight. These are revenue bonds. So they're going to be secured by the revenue generated by the facility and ultimately by the facilities themselves. So there's no actual obligation to the state. We're not backing this up with our state funds. The bonds are secured by the facilities themselves and the revenue from them. That's an important consideration that allows these things to be, the revenue bonds have been well tested. They've worked well for the Community Development Authority. I sent you a link in your email talking about a Supreme Court case from Wyoming Supreme Court case from 1978 that verifies the legality of these revenue bonds through the Community Development Authority. So it's just been a well-established method of issuing bonds. So once again, on page 24, we talk about a 2% minimum payable on the bonds. That was 3% before with the Energy Authority. Once again, just change that to recognize the exceedingly low interest rate environment we're currently in. Nothing magic about that. Could be 3%. Wouldn't really care that much. And that's, like I said, I'd like to highlight once again, page 20, section 3. They're going to be appointed by July 1st this year, meet at least 2 times between July 1st this year and July 1st of next year. And we're going to work over the interim to make sure that this authority is ready to go by July of 2022. The Department of Agriculture will provide administrative support. And that's why you'll see there's a $20,000 appropriation to the Department of Agriculture to help with administrative costs. So that's based off of the expenses of the Energy Authority Board, and just acknowledging that, and it's actually, that was $10,000 for Energy Authority. We're recognizing that they're going to probably have to meet at least 4 times, not twice, as we work this hard over the interim. So that's the bill, Mr. Chairman. Stand for any questions.
Committee questions. Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, on page 17, we talk, it reads about applicability, and it's targeting the livestock industry. and meat processing. Would that limit the extent of what this program would be able to assist by funneling it down to one industry? Whereas in the state, there's more than just the livestock industry in the agricultural business.
Mr. Chairman, that's an
Senator.
excellent catch. You know, that was something that was left over from the, when it's just meat processing, but it is just legislative findings. So it doesn't really have the full force and effect of law, but if you want to strike livestock and insert agriculture, I have no problem with that at all. I think that that'd be consistent with the bill.
Yes. Representative, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Also, in the fiscal notes, it's pretty ambiguous what this is going to cost. The energy, they have $2.2 million. And I've seen in past legislation where it's sometimes we create a program with no funding, and then later on we come and say, well, we've got this program with no funding, we need to fund it now. So do you envision, Senator, that later on we're going to have to fund this to a greater extent than $10,000?
Senator?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that's the work that we would do over the interim, and that's why it's so important. We're also going to reorganize. And so I'm fairly confident we can make that happen by, first of all, so we gain an agency, we can also consolidate an agency, so it'd be net neutral. And so like I said, if we consolidate all the regulatory functions, say like the livestock board under the Department of Agriculture, there'd be a savings there. But also the Beef Council is a perfect example. It's the most obvious, things like that, the Weak Marketing Commission that are currently under the Department of Agriculture. We could easily move that under the New Energy Authority, and that there's your, $2.2 million just with the Beef Council alone. So, yeah, they might have to, and those are just two examples, and I don't want to get too specific because I want your ideas too. But yeah, there's two easy ways that would guarantee that we'd be able to fund this using existing revenue sources.
Okay, Representative, well, got one over here, Representative, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, I believe in this bill, it talks about bonds, selling of bonds. That would also help out that $2.3 million. Am I correct?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, there's also provisions for, fees and things like that. So yeah, that's another possibility. Don't want to rely on that, but yes, that's another possibility as well, especially once they get up and running.
Thank you.
Representative Wharf?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Chairman Boner. I guess I have a couple questions. The first being, it's been referenced to the Energy Council. And I guess I wasn't here. Maybe some of you guys maybe are a little older than me, been here a little longer. When the Energy Authority was put together, was there any pre-existing department that drew from? I mean, what was the process? And I only ask that to ask as we go into the interim, if we pick that up, is there something else that we can reference, or are we heading down a new path? And then the other question, Mr. Chairman, and I don't want this to, I'm just going to ask the question, has the Energy Authority addressed conflicts that may arise with citizen legislators? Because I know that we had to have had legislators that were involved in the energy industry, but clearly, and this is not meant to be offensive to anyone, but I know that we do have, as citizen legislators, a lot of our legislators are involved in agriculture. So I just wonder if the Energy Authority has addressed that, if they've experienced any conflicts, and if so, how that was addressed there again. So when we go down this path in the interim, do we have something to reference? So that's why I asked those questions, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, if you're good with this, Representative Wharf, we have a man here who is muddled into the middle of energy and agriculture.
Muddle's probably not the
Because I
right
can think
word.
of Vice Chairman Clausen, go ahead and answer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'll make an attempt at this because I was on the Minerals Committee when we put the Energy Authority together. And it started out as the Infrastructure Authority and the Pipeline Authority. They were separate agencies, very efficiently ran, and they So they were, had a very pointed goal. So there was a bottleneck in the pipeline authority especially. There was a bottleneck in the flow to get gas out of Wyoming. And a lot of, there was an idea that it was engineered. So this authority went in there and sort of broke that up. And then they advocated on behalf of the industry and regulatory actions. And the infrastructure authority was electricity, and it was geared towards the same means. So they had a real high bond amount, but they only ever had to do one action. And after that, the mere presence pushed acts that were maybe perceived as being monopolistic towards a more reasonable solution. Does that answer your question?
Representative Wharf?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Clausen, yeah, I'm surprised because you're not that old. I'm surprised they didn't realize that the Energy Authority was put together fairly recently, apparently.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
evolved out of the pipeline authority. And
Yeah, so I appreciate that. I still have the second question I'd like addressed.
Chairman Boner, go ahead with that. You have that.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think that, the board's gonna be the one in charge of the authority and that's frankly why, not every last person on the board has to be from Wyoming to, ensure that there is, we're gonna do what's best for Wyoming ag and have that, that means reaching, getting our products out of state. And, when I think about conflicts of interest, only I'm most concerned about the board. If there's more specific concern with the legislature, I'd probably use some clarity on that if there's a specific concern.
Well, and Mr. Chairman, the reason I ask that is because the Energy Authority, obviously we've had some legislators that were in the energy industry, and I've wondered if there's conflicts that have arisen because maybe they were able to steer, direct things to benefit them. And I don't want to allege that anybody's done that. I want to make that clear. I'm just asking if that was ever experienced under the Energy Authority. And I'm just concerned because I know there's a lot of cross-pollination with other citizen legislators that are involved in ag. And I look at, if we're ever faced with a situation that somebody comes up with a great idea, but it involves citizen legislators, I can see a potential where maybe it looks very nefarious to the public because we've got so many agricultural interests in our body. And that's the only reason I bring it up is I just wondered if we've experienced that with the Energy Authority.
Representative Clausen, sounds like you might have an answer for that. Go
So,
ahead.
Mr. Chairman, not to my knowledge that I've ever been aware of, has this arisen? There's enough separation, and it's kind of like the three branches of government sort of thing. There's enough separation that any nonsense, I'm not saying that any nonsense has ever happened. None to my knowledge and none that I've ever heard of and none that I've heard brought up as an issue. Not that it couldn't happen. And when we're working this interim, we can put enough firewalls in, I think, that if to mitigate any concerns there.
Now, if a member of the legislature gets appointed to the board, that might not be a problem, but I don't anticipate that happening.
Yes, Representative Fortner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too have two questions. First of all, the catch title of this pretty much talks about agriculture and beef. But that's a pretty wide stroke with the brush. As we dig into this and you go down in here to page 5, 1 and 2, it starts talking about agriculture, well, it continues talking about agriculture industry, which means work relating to science, art, business, finance, and cultivating soils. That's a pretty wide topic when we just started out talking about agriculture. I want to know, I guess, how does science and art fit into this program? Thank you.
Senator.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think that it's, as a ag producer myself, you have to have that good scientific knowledge of how things work. If you're, spraying weeds, you have to know how your applicators work, right? But there's a little bit of an art when it comes to deciding where to put, where to put the applications and where not to. So it's just a definition of, that it's, there's science involved, but there's also a lot of judgment involved, and that's more of a, I mean, it's not, an important part of the definition, but just acknowledging that there's both science and judgment. I guess gut judgment that goes into agriculture.
Yeah, Representative, I think when it's talking about art, it's talking about the art in conjunction with the science and all involved with animal husbandry as well as the crop sciences.
Thank you, Chairman. I have one more question,
Go
please.
ahead.
How much of this program is paid for with COVID money, the stimulus money?
None of it right now.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Blackburn.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, so how much of it could be paid for with COVID money?
Oh, Mr. Chairman, that's a good question. Yeah, if we're referencing especially the bill that just passed the federal level, that's something I have not considered. It seems like the House is a little bit ahead of the game, and Senate, we haven't even considered, the fact that money will have on our state. So if you probably know more than I do, but certainly that might be part of the discussion with the interim as more rules are promulgated at the federal level, we understand what those funds can and can't be used for.
Yeah, I think as we go into special session, it could be a way of addressing the $20,000 at least. And maybe some other, we have some programs stood up for that specific purpose. And meat processing bill was set up that way. So I don't think this will be standing in 2022. It's my hope that we'll be done printing money for whatever.
You would think, Mr. Chairman.
You would think, but we'll see. But I think it'll be addressed. At least the $20,000 could be addressed in the special session. Okay, I don't see any more questions. I've got one somewhere in here. And we haven't done it this way that I can think of as far as passing a bill that was subject to interim work. And so somewhere in here, we need an insertion that it would be subject to approval by the management council, because I think we'll bring this as if the bill passes and it's the wish of this committee, because we're going to work on interim topics pretty quick here. You have a place, would it be in that final paragraph that we would put somewhere it has to be subject before we do interim work will be subject to management council approval?
Well, Mr. Chairman, it's kind of 6 one way, half a dozen the other. We could just put it in the bill and not leave it up to management council and say that this will be an interim topic. Either way, honestly, Mr. Chairman, there's nothing in our statutes that says management council can prevent us from taking up a topic. So, and I understand that it's me being a little bit of a rebel here as a committee chairman, but I imagine this is going to be a topic regardless of what management council thinks. But I think that'd be a pretty good addition to the bill, saying that this will be an interim topic for the ag committee.
Okay. What I've found with management council is that they usually give committees broad authority to do what they need to do and what's best for whoever they're in it. So maybe we don't, but it might come as a just so it doesn't come as a shocker if we have a third reading amendment to that effect. So any other questions by the committee? Representative Wharf? Well, and we'll probably have statements and what have you. So we have public testimony. Kind of raise your hands, and I'm not sure. Carol, welcome back, Carol, other Carol. Let's start with Director Miyamoto. Do you have some?
Thank you,
something?
Mr. Chairman. I'm bringing him over for you.
All right.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Doug Miyamoto with the Department of Ag. I have Stacia Berry with me here today, and we don't have much to offer or to comment on this bill other than to clarify a few things for your consideration today. I would like to thank Chairman Boner for, he did give me a call about this several weeks ago. It hasn't been a new development, and asked me if the Department of Ag was capable of managing the administrative functions of an energy authority or board like that. And we do have several subsidiaries across our agency that we do administratively manage the boards. And so there's a couple of things that I just wanted to clarify. And one is that within the Department of Agriculture today, we don't have any agribusiness functions. And we don't have a marketing program for agriculture within the Department of Agriculture either. Those functions exist at the Business Council today. We do have several other subsidiaries though, and they've been mentioned today. One of them is the Wheat Commission and the other one is the Beef Council. And I think it's important to point out in this case that both the Beef Council and the Wheat Commission are funded by user fees, checkoff dollars. Those are not general funds. And so those are for a specific purpose, but we can't direct those monies in any other direction other than advocacy for those commodities as they go into the marketplace. And those are managed by independent boards, which I'm thinking most of the folks on the committee today know that already, but they've been mentioned today about consolidation and potential sources of funding. And so I just wanted to clarify that the dollars that are collected, those are special revenue fees for those independent authorities and are used for those commodities. And then the other part that I wanted to make sure I got to today was not to try to give a false impression to the committee that I have expertise that I don't. I think we're really comfortable in supporting the administrative functions of any board. I mean, we can pay travel vouchers, we can set up meetings, we can file the minutes and do that type of administrative support for the board. But when it comes to bond authorities, collection of bonds and helping a board establish itself regulatorily and providing technical assistance on that front of revenue bonds, that is an area where we don't have any knowledge. Now, I have made contact with the Wyoming Energy Authority and have an appointment with them so that hopefully Director Morrell can stomp out some of my ignorance, but I don't know how successful he'll be in that endeavor. I'm trying to learn about bond authority and how those programs work technically, but that's an area that I'm not comfortable reporting to the committee this morning that I could help them very much with. On the regulatory side, in establishing processing facilities, the technical help that is needed to understand federal regulations mostly is where we tend to experience most of our questions and assistance to people that are interested in processing ag products. We can help in that realm as well. So the functions that are laid out in the bill very clearly for the Department of Agriculture, which would be administrative support for the authority itself, and the technical assistance to help the processors, we're comfortable that we can carry out those tasks. When it comes to the finer details of how to implement a successful bond authority program, that's an area where I am afraid to report I may not be your best source of knowledge there. So with that, Mr. Chairman, that's all I have. And I'm happy to try to answer any questions that anybody might have for the Department of Ag.
And Mr. Director, I believe that the bill doesn't really want the Department of Ag to be involved in the bond authority. You will have a member on the board that'll understand what's going on with that, but that'll be a function for those people of that higher pay grade, I'm pretty sure, as I read the bill. So any questions for Director Miyamoto? Okay. Thank you, Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other public testimony? Come on up. welcome to our committee.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. My name is Amy Hendrickson. I'm with the Wyoming Wool Growers Association, and we are supportive of this bill. We think this would be really good for our industry, for agriculture as a whole in the state. One thing, and I have to apologize, I hadn't thought about this prior to this, but one of the things on page 5, when it talks about the members shall be engaged chiefly in sheep production, the good thing about raising sheep is you have two products. You have, in some cases, you have two products. You have lamb and you have wool. But not everyone who raises sheep for lamb also raises wool, because some meat sheep do not have wool. But for the most part, those that raise wool also have lamb. So I wondered if there was a possibility of perhaps changing that to say that it's chiefly in the lamb and wool business, because you do have two different products. And it is important that if you're looking at issues of wool production or ways to improve wool production or wool product production, such as through the wool mill in Johnson County, that there's someone with expertise in wool and what makes wool valuable and what makes wool products valuable.
Will you be okay if we just leave it with sheep production? Because it includes in my mind, probably all of it. A hair sheep is a hair sheep and a wool breed, and there's mutton and wool, and I think all of it.
Right. My, Mr. Chairman, that would be fine. My only concern is that the person on there has an understanding of wool production, and someone who does not raise wool may not necessarily have an understanding of what wool production involves.
Okay.
That's my only point.
All right. Representative Wharf.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, so is it important that we say lamb and wool or lamb or wool? Because I just wanted clarification on that, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Wharf, it would be my preference that it's lamb and wool.
Okay. I'm convinced that limits it down. We have mutton industry, which is used ewes, which are hard to get rid of, but they're part of the whole picture, and they're not lamb and they're not wool. And I guess, well, we'll have that discussion, but I prefer leaving it as sheep.
Mr.
And
Chairman.
that encompasses the entire.
Yeah, I would, I see what you're saying
Yeah.
there, and, because we also have the potential for dairies as well,
Yes.
and that sort of thing. As long as somewhere, maybe through the interim, there is some discussion that that you're looking for someone who has that broad understanding.
Okay. That will be leaving up as a decision for that board member. And I see where yeah. But if we leave it as sheep, I don't know if the committee is aware we have sheep dairies that I don't think they're very big, but they are they're significant in their mind. It's a niche market that I think has some tremendous possibilities, but that could be included in the bill, and the expertise would be required by anybody who's going to fill this position on the board, the entire sheep industry. Representative Clausen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Maybe just a more broad question, but recently in the sheep industry, we've had some hiccups as far as processing goes. Do you think this bill might facilitate in some of those issues down the road, and maybe even cut something like that off if it were to happen again?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Clausen, thank you for the question. Yes, I do. The other aspect of it that I think is important is that processing beef and processing lamb are two different things. I mean, it's meat processing, obviously, but you have different sized animals. And one of the things that was a big concern when we lost the Greeley plant, lamb plant, that was that the equipment, which was for processing lamb, is different than the equipment needed for processing wool. And we were very concerned about losing that infrastructure. And I think that this bill would also help that aspect of it. You know, obviously we raise more beef cattle than we do lamb in Wyoming, but if we stay just totally focused on beef processing, then we will not have the capacity to do lamb. And this would allow our meat processors to expand.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. More testimony from the public. Mr. Magagna.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, Jim McGaggan with the Wyoming Stockgrowers Association. You know, as I sit in front of a legislative committee and testify for or against a bill, that usually describes our position. In the case of this bill, I would add something to it and say this is a piece of legislation about which we are excited because we see tremendous potential in being able to move forward with something like this to help certainly our industry, the beef industry, but all of agriculture in Wyoming. In our case, I think this is also part of what I would look at as a package that has benefits. This is Senate File 122, Senate File 124, which I believe is on committee of the whole in the House now, gives the Attorney General in Wyoming some authority to bring legal challenges under the right set of circumstances to something like the current scenario we have in the beef industry with the big four packers and that. So, you know, we like that bill as well, but it's one thing to challenge what's out there. But as we do that, we have to be able to provide something to take its place to the extent that we can do that. So if we can, through something like that, when appropriate, challenge what the big ones are doing, but we need at the same time moving forward to create a capacity in the state. And we've made some progress in the last year with several new small processing plants with some enhancements to others, some of that using CARE Act monies, and understand maybe some more of those monies will be available now. But to really benefit the producer side of our industry, we need something on a larger scale, not of the scale of the big four, but something that enables us to process and export, sell meat in interstate commerce, something that enables us to process. We've seen an outstanding opportunity to develop in Taiwan, for example, to market Wyoming beef, branded beef and lamb as well. We haven't been able to do that successfully other than just some small shipments due to lack of processing facilities. And you know, the Business Council currently has a few dollars available maybe to help someone get started, but it's $1 million or perhaps $2 million, and that alone does not attract the private investment that we need to have a meaningful facility or facilities in the state. Potential with these dollars, which do not risk any state dollars, but simply provide the structure to make more significant dollars available to be combined with other private dollars for a facility, I think is, from discussions I've had, has the potential to excite investors to come into Wyoming and develop processing facility. And if that works for beef, I can see where that opportunity could exist for other crop production in the state as well. So we recognize that there's a lot of detail to be worked out here yet. That's why I believe the approach of passing this bill now and then making it a subject for more intense review and study by the committee and coming back if necessary with any additions or adjustments next year is the appropriate approach to this. And with that, would simply strongly urge your support for this bill and be happy to entertain any questions.
Committee questions? Okay, thank you, Mr. McGagn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Others? Come on up, Keith. You know, well, Well, he's sitting down for all of the producer groups and others that have ideas for interim topics. They have to be in tomorrow by 5 o'clock. I think, oh, I've got, you must be able to find the site. I got an email. Wasn't sure everybody else got it, but we would welcome any ideas people have from the committee as well as from our industries. Thank you, Keith. Go ahead. Go ahead
Thank you,
when you're
Mr.
ready.
Chairman. Thanks for adding something else for me to think about here over the next day, while the Wheat Commission is actually having a meeting later today, and hope to maybe see some of you later today. Keith Kennedy on behalf of the Wyoming Wheat Growers, and full disclosure, I'm also the exec of the Wyoming Wheat Marketing Commission, work for them. With the wheat industry, I think it's important to remember that 60% of the wheat that's grown in Wyoming is exported to foreign countries. And one thing that we had actually looked at a few years ago was what's called a unit train facility, where 110 car units could be loaded. One of the biggest roadblocks or stumbling blocks to that was the fact that just that railroad loop that would need to be built is about, at the time, 7 or 8 years ago, is about $5 million. And so I see the ability to collaborate across sectors of agriculture, perhaps even including some of my other clients, ag business, where we have, in many cases, some stranded natural gas that might well be used for fertilizer, and the ability to export that within the country, and we can benefit all the sectors in ag with this. So we're strongly in support of this bill and look forward to working with the committee over the interim as well.
Questions? Thank you, Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Moline, welcome to the committee again.
Mr. Chairman, Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau, and I do appreciate you still have a smile on your face when I come up yet again. Sitting in favor of this bill, I really appreciate that it's not specific to a commodity, that it's, it's agricultural processing. I think one of the things that's happened because of the result of the latest virus outbreak is that people are much more in tune to where their food's coming from, not just meat, but to some of the cereals and such. And what I'm hoping is that this authority would help us capitalize on that. People want to buy local meat. They're willing to buy a freezer and have a place to store it. I do think this is a great idea, and I look forward to some of the projects that will hopefully come out of it. With that, Mr. Chairman, committee, I'd sit for any questions.
Committee. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Any other public testimony?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
we do have a couple of reps in the room that we might want to recognize.
Well, I included you in that. Oh, I'm sorry. I see what you mean. Representative Hunt. Okay. Welcome as you and Representative Nyman are here. Both of you, thank you for coming and listening to our bill. So I guess if we don't have anybody with a hand raised on the internet. Okay. Before we close public testimony, did you have anything more, Chairman Boner?
Well, no, Mr. Chairman, just to point out that the Department of Ag and I are on the same page. The expectations, they provide purely administrative support, and of course, we'll include them in the discussions, as well as the Energy Authority, as we've heard from them already on the Ag Committee. So they'll be a part of the interim discussion. But
okay, thank you. Committee, what's your pleasure?
Bill.
Been moved by Clausen. Is there a second? Seconded by Fortner. Discussion on the bill? Yeah, Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree that this is a very important philosophy. It's something that's needed in the state, but I'm reticent to agree to something that is going to encumber the state of Wyoming without knowing what that cost will actually be. In my mind, we're growing government here with not knowing what it's going to cost. And so I'm a little concerned about that. If I guess when we go to the floor with this bill, there'll be more discussion, but it is a concern.
Representative Wharf.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I guess I kind of echo those same concerns. I guess one of the questions I have is if this is going to be an interim topic, can this not be laid back and also be part of that conversation? And if, I guess I'll wait for the answer to that question. That's the first question, Mr. Chairman.
So, yeah, and I've thought about that as well. I believe that the bill itself, there's been a massive amount of work already done. A lot of parties have come together, and I believe the bill itself will only be a framework for what we will try to fine tune in the interim and get questions for. I think we need probably more people at the table than what we've got today. So.
And I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. I guess the question I still have is I do believe if we create this, then we've obligated us to follow this. I believe once we create this authority by establishing that board, we're locked into having that Ag Authority Board. And it does say that it doesn't become active until 2022. And I guess if we feel that this is absolutely essential that we have this, the question I have, and there again, I'm just going to throw this out as an idea. Should we put a sunset in there that this board is sunset in the event that we can't come up with a bill? Otherwise, I see this as obligating us. If we go through the interim process and we haven't got a determination by July 1st of 2022, we have a board that's in effect that we haven't resolved via this interim process. I mean, none of us have a crystal ball. We don't know what that outcome will be. If we don't have something by 2022, and I just throw that out trying to save the bill, because I think it's problematic in my mind to pass something not knowing what the outcome is. And so I guess probably the only way I can support moving the bill forward is to put a sunset in here in the event that the interim committee does not come up with something by July 1st of 2022, because this is going to be a large undertaking in my mind. And I don't want to obligate the interim committee to have a deadline of July 1st, 2022, which this sets. If we put a sunset in here, it can be brought back up. If the interim committee takes more time, it can be brought up, and the activation date of the board could be rolled back as well. I mean, I don't know. That's just an idea to the committee, but right now, I guess without some type of amendment addressing this, I don't think I can vote this out of committee, even though I really support the concept. I question whether we're not obligating future bodies. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Representative Clausen.
Mr. Chairman, I don't see a problem with the sunset on this. I think it puts our feet to the fire. Really, I might suggest that it be 2023. So if we just don't come up with something in the interim, and the next guys decide that we're all gone, and the next guys decide this is no good, they can deal with it.
Would you be more comfortable, Representative Wharf, if we moved it to 2023?
Mr. Chairman, I believe maybe moving it to 2023 or putting a sunset date in it, because I do think it's irresponsible for us to pass something when we don't know what we're going to have. And I sense that there's some reluctance from our committee, and I don't want to speak for everybody, but I don't think this will move forward if we don't do something with that, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Committee, Representative Winter. Oh,
yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. With respect to good representatives comments. I think he has a good point. But I guess my question relative to that is, are there any guarantees that we will get this topic as an interim topic this coming year? That's never a guarantee, is it?
Chance. I'm sorry, Chairman Boner, you
Okay,
go
well,
ahead. We've had some dealings with management council. As I've said before, they are usually give us quite a bit of latitude, but go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I
Senator.
agree. I'm not concerned about management council. Frankly, there's been times where we, ask for forgiveness rather than permission anyways, but I don't anticipate it being a problem. As far as I kind of like the idea of a sunset day, if we move it back, the effective date on page 3 to 2023, and then have, repealer effective the same day. That will give us, it's kind of 6 one way, half a dozen the other. And I agree that, that is kind of we are kind of building an airplane as we're flying it. That's the way I honestly operate in most of my life. So I feel comfortable with it. I understand that not everybody's the same way, but I think that'd be a pretty good way of going about it. And of course, if we do get it done in a time frame, we can always change that effective date back to 2022 over the interim with the bill that we bring forward. And do it the way, if everything works out. But if we need an extra year, or say if it'd be a budget session and you have that 2/3 requirement to get a bill introduced, that could present a problem, who knows? I think that's a good concept, easy amendment to change that effective date to 2023 and then have a repealer for the same July 1st, 2023.
Are you good with bringing that amendment? Representing Wharf, and we'll go into a full discussion.
Mr. Chairman, but I see other members wanting to make comments. So I do support that. I think that's a great idea, but let's have more comment. Mr.
Yeah,
Chairman.
I do too. Go ahead, Representative Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know there's been a lot of hard work on this bill through the interim by the Ag Committee. I understand that. I really, really like that concept. I'm real nervous and real shaky about how we're going to finance that in the future. Are we enlarging government? Things like that. I'm probably a no vote right now. So I just wanted to let you know that.
Are you any more comfortable with the 2023 and a sunset date on the legislation?
2023 and the sunset date's fine, but we need to know monies.
Okay. All right. There's a motion to extend the final date for this legislation to 2023. Is it July 1st? Is it? Okay, July 1st, 2023. It'll give it another year.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, and just so the secretaries can follow, this is on page 4, line 10, where it says that they shall not exercise those powers until July 1 of 2023. And I think we should put a sunset date. And I don't know, Mr. Chairman, you also suggested a repealer. I don't know if that's better than the term sunset. I mean, I'm not sure the language that fits that best, but should we also, instead of having the board appointed to begin on 2021, should that be moved back to 2022? Is that the only reason I ask that, Mr. Chairman, is the funding? Because if we leave it at 2021, but we're going to go till 2023, they're going to have to function 2 more years without any additional funding than what this bill currently, I think it's $20,000, something like that. And that's the only question I have for the bringer of the bill is, can they survive that long with that little funding, or does that throw a wrench in the monkey works?
Yeah, I'm not convinced that it will, because the industry will be involved, and that's our intent, is to try to keep them.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I don't believe so. I think that's an important part is having the board appointed, so we work alongside them as we bring this up together. And yeah, the appropriation, I think is gonna be totally fine. Obviously, we'll have another budget at a later time if we don't get it done within the next year. I'm still confident we can, you know, yeah, we can always come back and ask for more if needed. So, yeah, to be clear, the only thing that we're expanding in government is the $20,000 for pay and per diem and travel for the board. That's all that we're doing with this bill. So I understand that there is an element of uncertainty, but I think the circumstances require us to, you know, I know we're the government, but it's okay to take a risk every once in a while, but this is a good fail safe, this proposal. Because there's no guarantee we're going to get it done, but I'm confident we can. But in case it doesn't, it's good to have that fail safe.
Okay, Representative Wharf, would you be okay with us leaving on line 10 of page 4, leaving the July 1, 2022 alone so that that board can become active? I don't really want to see them starting up a year later if we've got a board that can be active by then.
Yeah.
And then working on that final date as
Yeah.
a sunset.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I guess the only question I have is if we have not, through the interim process, been able to come up with what we want that board to do by 2022, what are they going to be doing for a year while we're still working on defining all that? That's the only question I have is we're creating a board, we're giving them powers, but we're telling them that we're not going to let them exercise that for another year. I mean, because if the interim bill comes out and come back and fix that, but that's the only thing I look at it. If we give them the powers, but we haven't defined how that's going to actually play out, then we got a board that's sitting there for a year that doesn't know what really they're doing, yet they have that authority and that task.
Maybe would it be best to leave that date out altogether? No, go ahead.
Yeah, Mr.
Senator,
Chairman,
you're the
also
one.
page 28, I think is a little bit, provides some clarity. It's talking about, you know, the board meeting starting on July 1st, 2021. We also have to, you know, it says 2021 to 2022 on page or lines 17 and 19.
Yep.
And so we'd have to change that to 2023. I still think it's important the board start meeting this July, but just extending the effective date, and that's both on page 28 and page 4 till 2023 with the repealer. And to answer the representative's questions, the sunset dates just says it's, you know, this section is repealed on a certain date. It's the same thing. So.
Yeah, and I just was wanting the specific language that Chairman Boner would like in his bill, because
All right.
it is your bill, so.
We're gonna keep him in his. Huh? Okay. Representative Portner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As it stands right now, I'd have to be a no vote on this. And the reason being is because as we look down the road, I'm not very optimistic for the future of Wyoming as far as minerals goes. But the other thing about this bill right here that sticking in my craw is on the very last page of the bill where it says notice agency estimate administrative impact required. I see that going to build government in the future, and I'm not for that. I'm not for more government for our taxpayers to have to support going forward or down the road. So I'd be a no vote on this bill. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Yes, Representative Larson.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I haven't been very comfortable with this bill the whole time. I know that's going to upset a bunch of people, but I really think we need to go to interim and discuss this. And I think we need to work with our business council and force them to do this sort of stuff. I think we've got an agency there that could do this if we made them do their job for ag. So I'm hoping maybe in the interim, we can bring them forward. I was disappointed they weren't here today.
Yeah.
I'm going to be a no vote.
I'm convinced this bill is well outside of the scope of what the business council can do, and that's part of why it was brought forward. I'll say a few things before I let the senator make his comments. So what we have done by not interfering at all is we've exported pretty much all the ag products of Wyoming to other places, other countries. What we're hoping to do with this is bring back, take away a little bit of the control that the 4 large packing plants, which is a monopoly. All they have to do is a phone call and they can set prices. They can throw us out of it. We're in a global market. This gives enough flexibility and latitude for businesses within Wyoming to take back a part of that market share. And it may be fairly insignificant, but it would, right now we're slaughtering 1,600 animals a year and we can't keep people's freezers full. And I've got, well, those are the small ones. And we're hoping to have something bigger and not just livestock, but it would be all crop production. And so that's what this bill is hoping to address. Business Council can be a part of it, but they will not have the money nor the latitude. This will be a private undertaking that we're trying to set up a framework and a way of facilitating the expansion of ag processing agricultural products within Wyoming. So that would be, go ahead, Representative Larson.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. You brought up the issue on the big conglomerate meat packers, and we're bringing a bill through judiciary. I just heard it, that the Attorney General is bringing more power to her, or to the position to go after these conglomerates. So I think that, I don't know what that had to do with anything with this bill.
Well,
Mr. Chairman,
yes,
do we have, I'm lost here. Do we have an amendment on the table, or
we're on it.
do we have a
Yeah.
second on it?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, it's my understanding we're discussing it. I don't know that there's been any formal movement of that, but I wanted the committee to discuss it. When we're ready, I can make that motion, but
Do you want to,
Well,
okay, go ahead and make the motion.
I'm not gonna make a motion. I want to comment on this, and then I'll make a
Okay.
motion.
Okay,
So the sunset date portion of this committee, I think this addresses the concerns, and I think it addresses the growing government concerns. So it'll be up to this committee. If we decide to grow government, we can, but I don't think we will, because it's in this committee. The only portion that'll be there is the $20,000, and if we don't get this off the ground, it goes away with the sunset provision, which I think is a genius. It holds our feet to the fire and holds industry's feet to the fire. I think that softens any concerns that anybody may have on this. As far as the Business Council stepping in and doing this, they've been in existence since 95, something like that. Haven't got it done. We either need to move down the road or figure something else out. Now, this particular thing doesn't, it's set up structured to use private money and go down the road in that route. So I think that also mitigates some portion or some fear of growing government. I think that pushes those fears away at very least. And this will be in the interim, and it'll be in control of the joint committee, the Senate and the Ag Committee. And if we don't like where this goes, all we have to do is nothing, and it sunsets and it goes away. But I think it's an important tool headed down the road that if we don't stand up and say, hey, we need to do something here, we won't do anything. And the status quo is, I think, worse than anything that may be perceived coming down the road. And with that, I'll move the amendment of the sunset date.
to 2023.
2023 and a sunset date like we discussed. Does the secretary need more clarity or?
Okay. So I think anywhere, go ahead, Senator, I'm sorry.
Okay, so, Mr. Chairman, and I mean, obviously, we allow staff to make conforming amendments in case we miss
reference, but on page 3, line 21, strike 2022 and insert 2023. Page 28, lines 17 and 19 do the same, strike 2022, insert 2023. Then add another section that said this act is repealed effective July 1st, 2023. So that'd be new
That,
language.
that section would be the final section.
Yes, what
section
staff
5.
can figure out what number it
Okay.
is.
Yeah, they may want to reorder it somewhat.
And
Yeah, there'd
July
be
1st, 20.
another section that would be a repealer that would end. Would it be June 30th, 2023? That's what we have for the. No. We have several. When would you prefer that the repealer date?
July 1st, 2023.
Okay.
Repeal sections 11-52-101 through 207.
You have that down. We will work with you a little bit on that. Does the committee understand what we're doing with the repealer? Okay, and the sunset or sunset. Are you ready to vote? Question being called. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Oppose? Okay.
No.
No, okay. That motion passes. Okay, question being called on the bill. All those in favor, well, let's see, roll call. Just a second. Are you ready to vote on the bill, committee? Okay. Roll call, please.
Representative Blackburn,
No.
Vice Chair Clausen,
Aye.
Representative Fortner,
No.
Representative Heiner, Representative Larson,
No.
Representative Western, Representative Worf,
Aye.
Representative Winter, Chairman Eklund.
Aye.
Chairman Eklund, there are 5 ayes and 4 noes.
Okay. So the bill is passed. Thank you, Senator, for your help with that and your hard work on this bill.
That would be a due pass with amendments.
Okay. Dan, will you stick around for the amendment on the first bill? Oh, you got it taken care of. Thank you.
Here's the paper copy I have on that.
All right. Thank you.
So we're not growing government. It's not good. It has a long tradition of acquiring.
Doesn't matter how many times we say it.